The snowstorm was getting worse, but Sloane's pain was getting sharper. Her pregnant belly clenched again, her breath catching as she gripped the seatbelt with one hand and her stomach with the other. "Mark, please," she whispered, voice tight with panic. "I think my water's about to break. We need to go to the hospital." But Mark did not even glance her way. He kept driving, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the snowy road. In the back seat, Evelyn, his mother, scoffed under her breath. "Sloane, must you always be so dramatic? It is just cramps. You always find a way to ruin everything." The words stung, but Sloane said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. But when a sudden gush of warm fluid soaked her pants, panic overtook fear. "Mark, my water broke." "The baby is coming!" she cried. Mark slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the ice. Before she could catch her breath, he jumped out, rounded the car, yanked open her door, and hissed, "Get out!" Sloane stared at him, stunned. "What? I cannot even stand. I am in labor." But he grabbed her arm and pulled her out, her boots slipping on the icy pavement as she struggled to stay upright. "I'm not putting up with another one of your performances," he barked. "You wanted attention. You got it." And just like that, he pushed her onto the snowy curb, climbed back into the car, and drove off, his mother staring coldly through the frosted window beside him. The red taillights vanished into the white void. Sloane was alone. 9 months pregnant. In labor. In a blizzard. No phone, no help. Just cold contractions and betrayal. But as she knelt in the snow, clutching her belly, she wasn't thinking about pain. She was thinking about survival. For herself. And for the child inside her, who had done nothing to deserve any of this. If this made your blood boil, stay with the story. Because what happens next will test the limits of human cruelty and human courage. Sloane's boots sank into the snow with every trembling step, each contraction slicing through her like a hot blade in the frozen air. Her breath came in ragged clouds, vision blurred by snowflakes and tears. The blizzard howled around her, like it wanted her gone too, just like Mark and Evelyn. She had no phone, no plan, only pain and instinct pushing her forward. Her soaked pants clung to her legs, icy and heavy. She stumbled, dropping to her knees, as another wave of pain overtook her. The memory of Mark's cold words echoed in her ears. "I'm not putting up with another performance." That wasn't a husband, that was a monster in love with control. The storm seemed endless. Every direction was white. Her body was failing, yet something primal kept her crawling through the snow. Then a sound, crunching footsteps. She turned her head, barely able to lift it. A figure emerged, cloaked in a thick jacket hood, dusted with snow. "Do you need help?" the man asked, voice deep and calm. "My husband left me." Sloane choked. "I'm 9 months pregnant." "My water broke." The man moved quickly, but gently. "Name's Tom. My cabin is close. You can't stay out here." He lifted her with the kind of care she hadn't felt in years. Inside his pickup truck, warmth enveloped her like a blanket. The seats were worn but soft. "My wife Linda's a nurse," Tom said as he turned up the heat. "She'll take care of you." For the first time in hours, hope flickered. If you believe no woman should ever go through this alone, comment yes, and subscribe to this channel to support stories that matter. As Tom navigated the snowy road toward his cabin, Sloane fought to stay conscious, gritting her teeth through every jolt. But Tom kept speaking, grounding her in the present. "Linda's delivered babies before. You're going to be okay." Every word he said was a balm against the wounds Mark had left. Sloane didn't know if she would ever forgive, but for the first time that night, she dared to believe that she and her baby might survive. This was no longer just a story of abandonment. It was becoming a story of resilience, and it had only just begun. Wrapped in a cocoon of wool blankets, Sloane lay on the couch, every nerve on fire, her breath short and shallow. The crackling fire warmed the room, but her body trembled from exhaustion and fear. Linda moved around her with clinical precision and maternal tenderness, checking vitals, timing contractions. Every 3 minutes, Linda said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Sloane's shoulder. "You are strong, you are safe now." But Sloane's mind was still trapped on that icy roadside, the feel of Mark's hand wrenching her from the car. The sting of Evelyn's silence, the cruel echo of their abandonment. That trauma throbbed louder than the pain in her body. She clenched her fists, channeling all her rage, fear, and heartbreak into the next push. "You're doing great," Linda encouraged, kneeling beside her. Once more. Sloane screamed, her voice rising with the storm's wind outside. Then silence followed by a soft, wet cry. A cry that split the air and stitched her soul back together. Linda lifted a squirming pink baby into her arms. "Your daughter," she whispered, eyes glistening. Sloane looked down and wept. Her baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, fragile but alive, a symbol of everything that had not been broken. Hope, Sloane murmured, naming the child who had given her a reason to survive. But the moment of triumph shattered quickly. Hope's cries weakened her skin, paling. Linda's brow furrowed, and she immediately checked her pulse. "She's not warming up," she said, voice taut with urgency. "We need a hospital fast." The cabin's phone was dead. Outside, the storm roared even harder. Tom, who had just returned from stoking the fire, grabbed his coat without hesitation. "I'll go. I'll find help," he said firmly, disappearing into the snow. As the door slammed shut behind him, Sloane clutched Hope close to her chest, whispering prayers into the baby's soft hair. She refused to let fear take root again. Inside this tiny stranger's heartbeat was a defiant rhythm against the coldness she had endured. Link this moment to what you saw in Outline 2, the collapse of everything she once trusted, now met with the fragile but fierce fight for something worth rebuilding. She had been left behind, thrown away like a burden, but here in this storm, she was more than a victim. She was a mother, a warrior, and she would not let her daughter's light flicker out. The silence inside the cabin was interrupted only by the crackle of the fire and the labored sound of Sloane's breathing. Hope, still frail and wrapped in layers of blankets, lay in her mother's trembling arms. The storm outside roared on, as minutes felt like hours. Linda did everything she could: hot water bottles, skin-to-skin contact, whispered reassurances. But time ticked mercilessly forward. Sloane rocked her daughter slowly, whispering promises and prayers, her voice cracking from fear. "Stay with me, baby. You're my miracle. You're my hope." When sirens finally pierced the wind's howls, Sloane nearly collapsed with relief. Paramedics burst through the door, rushing to take the baby into an incubator, securing oxygen, wrapping her in warmth science could offer. Sloane followed, shoes slipping on ice, breath caught in her throat. Her body had given everything, but now it was her spirit being tested. At the hospital, the white sterility of the walls contrasted sharply with the rawness of Sloane's emotions. Hope was stabilized, her tiny chest rising and falling inside the incubator like a fragile rhythm of survival. But as monitors beeped and nurses moved efficiently, a new fear gnawed at her. What if Mark and Evelyn simply vanished without consequence? A knock at the hospital room's door answered that question. A detective stepped in, flipping through his notepad. "We found Mark's car near a motel," he said. "Your husband and mother-in-law are both in custody." Sloane's breath hitched. "They claim it was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding." Her voice cracked, fury rising like bile. "He threw me out of the car while I was in labor." "That's not a mistake, it's abandonment." The detective nodded grimly. "Your testimony is critical." As Sloane sat back down beside Hope, exhaustion blanketing her like the storm outside, she thought of Linda and Tom, their warmth, their courage. From the freezing dark to this sterile glow, it had been a journey of survival fueled by kindness. If you've made it this far in her story, comment the word "yes" and subscribe to this channel to follow Sloane's next steps. Because what she faced next was not just about healing, it was about fighting for justice. Link this back to Outline 3. The moment Hope was born, a mother was reborn too. One who would never again be silenced. The courtroom felt colder than the blizzard that had nearly taken Sloane's life. A year had passed since that brutal night, since Mark had thrown her onto the icy curb, like discarded trash, since Evelyn sat back in silence as her son abandoned a woman in labor. Now they stood before a judge, their expressions rehearsed lawyers, crafting them into victims of misunderstanding. Mark's defense argued that stress, exhaustion, and weather clouded his judgment, but no amount of spin could erase what he had done. Sloane sat rigid, fists clenched in her lap, Hope sleeping peacefully beside her in Linda's arms. Then Tom stepped forward. Calm, deliberate, and powerful, he recounted every moment of that night, how he found Sloane in the snow, the blood, the fear, the baby gasping for breath. Linda's voice followed unwavering. Leaving Sloane was a choice, not an accident, she said, locking eyes with the judge. No man forgets his wife is in labor unless he wants to. The judge's gavel came down hard, community service and a restraining order. Evelyn received the same. It was not prison, not quite justice. But it was something, a formal acknowledgement that Sloane had been wronged, that her pain mattered. As she exited the courthouse, Hope in her arms, she inhaled deeply, feeling freedom surge in her chest like spring air after a long, cruel winter. Later, her story, Hope in the Blizzard, poured from her fingers and onto paper. Writing became therapy, then purpose. Her words reached women around the world, women who had been betrayed, abandoned, belittled. At her first book signing, a woman clutched her hands and whispered, "My husband left me too. Your story gave me strength to leave." In that moment, Sloane understood her suffering had become someone else's survival guide. Inspired by the overwhelming response, she moved to a coastal town with Hope and opened Hope Café, a place for community, for healing, for women who needed a second chance. Comment threads filled with support stories and strength. Hope grew up surrounded by love, laughter, and legacy, not trauma. And while the scars remained, Sloane had built something beautiful from her pain. Linked to idea 4. Sometimes justice is not a sentence, it's the life you build after. The coastal town embraced Sloane and Hope like a long-lost family. The sea, with its rhythmic tides and boundless horizon, became a symbol of healing, a stark contrast to the snowstorm that had nearly claimed them both. The café thrived not just as a business, but as a sanctuary. Walls once bare now held photos of milestones. Hope's first steps, her giggles captured mid-laugh, with Tom Linda's weathered hands guiding her through cookie recipes. George's fishing hat tilted playfully on Hope's tiny head. As the seasons passed, Hope Café evolved into more than just a tribute to survival. It became the heartbeat of a community that had learned to gather, share, and breathe again. Local artists hosted exhibits. Writers read poetry on open mic nights. Volunteers packed care boxes for abandoned mothers, a foundation quietly funded by the cafe's growing profits. Linda, though, aging, still visited with Tom. Her steps were slower, her breath shorter, but her eyes sparkled with the same warmth that once greeted a frozen, panicked Sloane at the door of a modest cabin. "You gave us purpose," she often whispered, especially after her diagnosis. When Linda passed, they planted a garden bench outside the café in her memory, the plaque reading, "For those who gave shelter in the storm." Hope, now 18, chose marine biology, drawn by the sea that had washed away her mother's tears. At her graduation, Sloane stood beside Tom George and a frail but smiling Evelyn, who now lived in a nearby cottage. The wounds had not vanished, but forgiveness had softened the edges. Evelyn had begun planting flowers, with hope daisies for innocence, marigolds for resilience. In one quiet moment, she whispered, "I failed you, but I will never fail her." Her words, though, late landed gently on soil already nourished by growth. Linking to idea 5. Sloane's second book, Rising from the Snow, became an international bestseller. Readers wrote letters, many starting with, "Because of you, I found courage." The café became a foundation for mothers starting over each wall, echoing stories of strength. If this chapter moved you, let the world know. Comment yes and subscribe for the next part of Sloane's journey, because her story reminds us the storm may define a moment, but it is hope that defines a lifetime. Years passed, but the ripple of that blizzard night continued to shape every chapter of Sloane's life. Now in her early 50s, she watched proudly as Hope stood before a packed room at their café, no longer just a daughter, but a confident young woman, a marine biologist, and a beacon of everything they had fought for. Hope spoke passionately about ocean conservation, her voice clear and composed, echoing strength inherited from generations of women who refused to be broken. Behind her, the wall displayed a mosaic of their life, the faded hospital band, from the night she was born, the first newspaper clipping about hope in the blizzard, and the worn photo of Tom, Linda, and George beaming with pride. The café had become a landmark, not just for tourists, but for survivors' women who carried invisible bruises and found refuge in its warmth. One woman whispered to Sloane after a book signing, "I was left too. But your story gave me the courage to walk out." Those words, like many before them, reignited Sloane's mission to ensure no woman ever faced abandonment alone. Evelyn, once a silent accomplice, now tended the garden out, back her bond with hope, genuine and redemptive. Even Mark's absence, now finalized through quiet divorce papers, no longer cast a shadow. The sunlit waves outside their seaside home mirrored their resilience. Life was not perfect, but it was whole. And sometimes, wholeness grows not from what you keep, but from what you survive and choose to rebuild. Linking to Idea 6, Sloane's story had become more than memoir. It was movement, healing, and legacy. Her pain birthed a purpose that touched thousands. If this ending left you breathless, share your thoughts below. Would you have forgiven Evelyn? Could you have let go of Mark's betrayal? Comment your answer and follow for more powerful stories that stay with you long after the final word. Neo.